Speaker, I hesitated on turning on my light because I wanted to see how many members on the other side would have actually risen to the challenge by the Prime Minister to support this bill. And it was interesting to see that none did. But be assured that after I have spoken, that they all will speak. But that's okay. And one would have expected that the member who is really the author of this would have leapt to his feet to support this bill, but I see he too sat on his hands and did not ring his own bell. It's okay. I think in debating this bill, Mr. Speaker, one maybe has to take a step back, because certainly in meeting many St. Lucians and getting them to try to understand what this is about, and the Prime Minister is correct, it's a bit difficult. And maybe we should focus a little bit less initially on what a sovereign fund is, and maybe we focus a little bit more on what the Prime Minister indicated was the purpose of the sovereign fund. I happened to be present in the room in 2017, 2018, when we were able to get the World Bank, OECD, the IMF, ECLAC, to meet for an entire day to determine what was going to be the way forward for small island developing states because of the recurrence of exogenous shocks, in particular climate-related exogenous shocks. Entering to that meeting, we saw the catastrophe that took place in Dominica. We'd seen the catastrophe that took place in the BVI, British Virgin Islands. And we also had seen the catastrophe that had taken place in Turks and Caicos. And it was only later, after that meeting, that we also saw and witnessed what happened in Grand Bahama. In all of those instances, that one hurricane created more damage than the GDP of each one of those countries. And even though that there was insurance available, the insurance money paled in comparison to what we needed. And the purpose of the meeting in Washington, D.C. was to understand how we, as small island developing states, were going to overcome the economic rules that were in place that were preventing us from protecting ourselves against this exogenous shocks. The economic rules that are in place, Mr. Speaker, restrict our access to what's called overseas development funds, monies that are allocated by foreign countries to assist developing countries. And one of the key things that was precluding our access to those monies is a rule that once you had a per capita GDP over a certain amount of money, you couldn't get the money. And St. Lucia is on the threshold of that. In fact, we may actually, at this point, I believe, we might have actually gone past it and are now deemed to be a middle-income country. But countries like the BVI and the Bahamas clearly had exceeded the numbers. There were also restrictions that were being put upon us on how much money we could borrow based on our per capita GDP. Now, I want us to appreciate what the prime ministers and all the countries were arguing at the point. When these rules came in under the OECD, it was just after World War II. And we developed what was called the Bretton Woods system. It's when the IMF was introduced, the World Bank was introduced. And at that time, the rules as to how these organizations could provide resources to countries, those rules were established in the late 1940s, early 1950s. I bring that up because microstates like St Lucia didn't exist. It was only after the UK decided it wanted to get rid of the Commonwealth, and as such, give us our freedom, that we all of a sudden now had to apply those same rules. And it was at that same meeting in 2018, Mr. Speaker, where the IMF and the World Bank did a study, and the study said that the only way forward for us is that we had to build a reserve of monies to deal with an exogenous shocks. And the amount that they said originally is exactly what the Prime Minister said, that 4% of your GDP, and ultimately, ideally, 8% of our GDP. Our GDP, I think, is about 2.5 billion US dollars. So it means that 10% would be 250 million US dollars. Half of that is 125 million US dollars. So here it is that the Prime Minister has indicated to us and has come to Parliament, and by extension to the people of this country, in saying that his solution to this problem is to create a new vehicle. And that vehicle is this sovereign wealth fund. And that he's gone to great lengths to speak about the governance structures, which I will get to, in this particular fund. And that the bulk of it, but he never really said so, but I'm just taking from what he indicated, that the bulk of the money that would be going into this sovereign fund is going to come from our economic fund. So here it is, we have a fund called the Economic Fund, where, to his point, that the monies from the CIP, both in terms of the administrative fee and also in terms of the administrative fee and in terms of the donations, that these monies go into the Economic Fund. And the Prime Minister was 100% correct. He spoke about the governance structure of the Economic Fund. I believe I have that structure here. It's already a document in the House, but I'm happy to share it again, Mr. Speaker. It says the St Lucia National Economic Fund Board will consist of the following people: the Director of Finance, who is the chairperson, the Budget Director, the Chief Economist, a representative from Invest St Lucia, a representative from the Attorney General's Office, and a representative from the private sector. The functions of the fund are to advance loans to the government in approved capital projects. Now, this government, when they came in, amended that and took out the word capital projects and said any project approved by cabinet can be funded from the Economic Fund. Very subtle change, but a significant change, because there's a big difference between capital projects that are approved by cabinet and any project that's approved by cabinet. So you can have a recurrent expenditure. You can have whatever cabinet decides. They can choose to approve that project, and that project will be funded by the Economic Fund. It says to provide investment for government-approved capital projects, to reduce government debt, to purchase government bonds, and E, to provide monies for a purpose approved by Cabinet that is not considered recurrent in nature. So in essence, if there was an exogenous shock due to climate change, and there was monies in the economic fund, government was free to borrow that money, either in the form of a borrowing or to take the money to pay for whatever debts they would have. And that's allowed in this aspect. So when we talk about the need to create another fund, which you said repeatedly was for resilience and climate change issues, although the Prime Minister neglected, but I'm hoping the real author of the bill, when he gets his opportunity to speak, will give us more details, specifically what projects. Is this in adaptation, meaning are we going to invest in infrastructure in anticipation of something coming? Or are we going to wait for the catastrophe to take place and we're going to use the money to assist in recovering? No explanation was provided. A generic term, which can mean anything. I don't think after the Prime Minister spoke that anybody in this room, far less outside of this room, could have told us any project that the Prime Minister was specifically dealing with. Mr. Speaker, it says the Economic Fund Board will manage the monies and the business of the fund, consider and approve an application for loan or investments, ensure that a loan is used for the purpose of which it was granted, ensure that the proceeds of the loan are applied to the government-approved capital project, establish and maintain a sinking fund to be administered and applied as the board determines. The board. Remember, who makes up the board? The board is made up of the Director of Finance of St Lucia. It's made up of the Budget Director of St Lucia. It's made up of the Chief Economist in St Lucia. It's made up of a representative from the Invest St Lucia, a representative from the ministry responsible for commerce, a representative from the Attorney General's chambers, and a representative from the private sector. I repeat that because each one of these positions has a name and a face that we know. Each one of those persons are here in St. Lucia. And each one of those persons, as their daily job, are supposed to be protecting and managing the assets of our state. So it means that they have the requisite expertise to manage the economic fund. If I jump ahead to what the Prime Minister was making reference to, and that is the composition of the board of this sovereign wealth fund. The corporate secretary, 9 members appointed subject to subsection 2. Every person that's going to be appointed to the board is going to be appointed on the advice of the minister. All 9. All 9 people on the board are not designated, are not people who we know, but it's people that the minister has determined to be fit. Nothing else. he is going to be, or she, is going to be the person solely approved by cabinet to appoint any of the board members. The corporate secretary is being appointed on the advice of the minister. Imagine. And the custodian, which I will get to later, is being appointed on, guess what? The advice of the minister. And the investment manager on the advice of the minister. So everybody and everyone that the Prime Minister has indicated is there to protect us and are going to be independent, all are generated from the same person, the minister. That's who's appointing them. The minister. Now, what's a sovereign fund? Prime Minister talked about the Santiago Principles, which speaks about the establishment and the governance of any good sovereign fund. But if we look up in the dictionary, we'll see, because we have to keep it simple, it's a state-owned investment fund that invests in real and financial assets, such as stocks, bonds, real estate, precious metals, or alternative investments, such as private equity funds or a hedge fund. They invest globally and are funded by revenues from commodity exports or from foreign exchange reserves. Very important. A sovereign fund is genuinely funded from extra revenues that you get from exports. And this is why the countries that have the largest and wealthiest sovereign funds in the world happen to be the ones that are exporting oil. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Norway. So when they're selling the oil, the money they're making from the oil, after they extract 10% is generally the number to help with government. The remaining amount of money goes into a sovereign fund. And what they do with that money is that they have investors that assist them now to make sure that they can grow that money. So they're not just keeping that money still, they're allowing that money to grow. But remember, when you now buy bonds and you're investing into hedges and equity funds, etc., you don't have readily access to that money. Over the 50, 60 years of some of the more successful hedge funds, we try to determine and assess, because we must take the time to see who else has done these things and what's been the pros and the cons. And the cons that have come out of sovereign funds, and I'll explain how that works, is high expense ratios and sales changes. Meaning that the persons who are investing the money for you, in this particular case, the custodian, who is going to choose who he wants or she wants to be able to make those investments, that the cost that they're going to charge you for those things are going to be very expensive. Sovereign funds tend to suffer from management abuses. Now you have to imagine, if you have a situation where all 9 board members, the corporate secretary, the custodian, and the investment manager, all those 4 entities who are supposed to be acting independently, but all of them have been appointed by the minister, is management abuses possible? I asked the question, and maybe that's a source. And also what it says, because again, in every aspect of this bill, we continuously see the minister's involvement. So what's the point of taking this money to say we're putting it into an independently, separately managed fund, when at every step of the way, they must seek the advice, of the minister. So ultimately, the success of the fund and the independence of the fund and the efficiency of the fund is going to depend on the minister's advice. That's what it's ultimately going to come to. Now, we've heard that the main purpose of the fund is to support investments in climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and the third one being sustainable economic development. All of those things can be achieved through the economic fund, of where the money is supposed to be. The money is supposed to be in the economic fund. And I'm going to get to that. So, when we go, first of all, and we go, Mr. Speaker, annual report of the board. The board 43. The board shall submit to the minister, subject to subsection 2, and not later than 6 months after the end of each financial year, an annual report on the operations and activities and transactions of the board, containing an account of the performance of activities and operations of the board. Annual report under subsection 1 must be accompanied by the auditor's report. 3. The minister shall submit the annual report and auditor's report submitted under subsections 1B to be laid in Parliament within 28 days of its receipt by the minister, or if Parliament is not in session, within 28 days of the next session of Parliament. And before I get to the added piece, that language is not new. So, if we go to the CIP Act, we'll see Section 22, the audit. An independent auditor appointed under Section 22 shall not later than 3 months after the end of each financial year submit copies of the audited financial statement of the board and a report on the financial statement of the report. So the audit team, within 3 months of the end of the fiscal year, must submit a report. Not later than 3 months after the end of each financial year, and in accordance with Section 3, the board shall submit to the minister an annual report on the work. So in addition to the audit report, the CIP unit is supposed to submit an annual report. And that report is supposed to be then tabled by the minister of CIP no later than 3 months after that. So our financial year ends in March. It means that the minister must receive both the annual report and the audited report. He must receive those reports by July. And then now, the minister has up until September to put those reports to hear in Parliament. That's in the CIP Act. In the Economic Fund, which is where the money goes, an independent auditor appointed under Section 17 shall not later than 3 months after the end of the financial year submit a copy of the audited financial statement of the fund and a report on the financial statement to the board. No later than 3 months after the end of each financial year, the board shall submit to the minister an annual report on the monies and the businesses of the fund for the financial year, and the minister shall not later than 3 months after the submission of the annual report, lay the report in Parliament. So here it is. We have our own experiences. We have a CIP board dealing with billions of dollars. We have an economic fund dealing with supposedly billions of dollars. And the current government has disregarded that legal obligation that the Prime Minister says that he's put into this new sovereign fund. So if they're not following it on the economic, so in the case of the economic fund, there has never been a report, none, in 4 years, has not been put, a report has not been put in, period. And we know that with the CIP unit, that the last report was 1 year late. And the report that was due in October of last year still has not been tabled in front of the House. So what I want to say is, why on earth would the Prime Minister want to stand up, talk about the Santiago rules, which would have said the same thing, that there has to be reports, and there has to be transparency, and it has to be in the public, but here we have two glaring examples of millions of dollars of which the government has deliberately ignored what is in law. And so what is it we've learned? Should there be a penalty? Should the fund stop and cease unless they meet these timelines? Are we going to put some guardrails on? Are we going to put some real checks and balances? Or are we going to continue to fool ourselves that you can come to the House and bring a document, wave it around as if it is some legal document and there's some obligation on your part to follow it, when you have not? You haven't. So why should we trust you today with even more money? And remember, in this particular case with the sovereign funds, I want to repeat myself, that the 9 board members are chosen by the minister. The corporate secretary is chosen and selected by the minister. The custodian is selected and chosen by the minister. And the investment manager are all done so. And you're coming back with the same failed law. And what do you put in? You put in now another section to say that there's going to be a forensic audit every 3 years. And guess who the forensic audit goes to? Guess who the forensic, does the forensic audit come to Parliament? Is the forensic audit coming to the public? No. The forensic audit is going to the minister. To the minister. Again. That's who the money is going to. That's who the report is going to. It doesn't even say that he has to make it public. It makes no reference. It just says there'll be a forensic report. I'm reading something wrong. Forensic report says, your section says, your new added section, you have it there? Let me read it specifically. Notwithstanding this section, the board shall submit to the minister a forensic audit every 3 years. And that's supposed to mean something to us? That's supposed to be transparent and living up to the Santiago Protocol of accountability and transparency? When the Prime Minister wants to talk about a fund to be there for you and for your children and for your children's children, are you instilled with confidence that this bill puts all those safeguards in place? That the entire bill comes back to one person, the minister. And we're supposed to trust that? And that includes language and protocols that we have seen over time and time again that have failed us? Now, when we speak specifically about how this sovereign entity is going to work, one starts getting very nervous because of some of the language that's used here to describe what's going to take place. So section 33, Mr. Speaker, custodian. The board shall, on the advice of the minister and cabinet, appoint by instrument in writing on terms and conditions the board on the advice of the minister. So imagine, not only are they appointing the person, but the terms of their appointment is going to be determined by the minister. So who the person is going to be and the terms of what they're going to be are all being done by the minister. So I don't know what these 9 people are going to be doing, but anyway. And it says, a custodian appointed under subsection 1. Sorry, there was an amendment. Can I have that? 33. I want to make sure, because they, they've had this sovereign fund for all this time, and we were held up today because they were reprinting the sovereign fund. So again, I have a major concern that something as important as this was put in front of the House 2 weeks ago. I'm not so sure I've heard of any meetings with the civil society or with anybody to go through the details and presentation of the sovereign fund. Certainly the ones I spoke to this morning had not heard anything. And yet here it is, amendments were being made at the 24th hour and given to us. But that's okay. It says, a custodian appointed under subsection 1 holds the property of the fund in the name of the custodian. A custodian appointed, remember who's appointing the custodian? The minister. Holds the property of the fund in the name of the custodian. Think of that for a moment. That we're going to take hundreds of millions of dollars from the economic fund, where we know who the director of finance is. We know who the director of the budget is. We know who the chief economist is. We know all these people. We're now going to appoint 9 members that are going to be faceless, only known to the minister. And then the minister is going to select the custodian. He's going to advise them on who to appoint as the custodian. And then we're going to take the assets that we've taken from the economic fund, follow the money, taking the money from our economic fund, put it into the sovereign fund, and now we're going to put it in the name of the custodian. Not even the name of St Lucia. What are the safeguards that we know? A custodian appointed under subsection 1 holds the property of the funds in the name of the custodian, or if the board authorized, in the name of one or more nominees. Now, the Prime Minister, I guess he must have been joking, or maybe he just thinks it's late in the day and we all had lunch and we're suffering from a little siesta, said that this management of this fund is going to be, remember what he said? Under the Public Finance Management Act rules. But guess what? That only applies to the operating cost of the fund, because there's no Public Finance Management Act that would allow government funds, state funds, to be put into the name of an entity without having a bid process. Who's the custodian? How is the custodian selected? Are we simply just to trust the minister? Is the minister under certain guidelines as to how he is going to select this custodian? It says nothing We must take it for its basic English meaning, that there are no guidelines. There's none. The minister simply is going to choose a custodian, and we're going to turn around and throw a board under the pretext that this board is protecting us, and that this board is going to take this money and put it into the name of this unknown entity of which we, the people of St. Lucia, the people from my constituency, who would be depending on these resources to continue to see the improvement of their roads, to continue to see the development of their recreational facilities, to continue to see the development of houses. But instead of that money coming to them, we're going to be taking this money and giving it to a custodian selected by the minister himself. The functions of the custodian: to protect the fund assets and take all necessary administrative measures in relation to the custody of the assets, maintain internal control systems and records that clearly identify the nature and the value of the assets of the fund. Now, I want all of us to understand that the game is over, and people are getting much smarter about their money these days. And let us use the example. The example is the CIP, Mr. Speaker, is the CIP. The audit that is being done in the CIP, Mr. Speaker, is only of the activities of the board. But the escrow account that was set up and where the money was supposed to go is outside of the purview of the audit and has not been included in any audits. Okay? I want to repeat that. The monies in the real estate program, which are supposed to be going into an escrow account, those monies are outside of the audit. And I smell a rat. So I look back. What does the audit report say? Vague, just like the other ones. Meaning what? That the audit will be on the management of the board. The salaries it pays, the rent it's paying, the electricity it's paying. But the money, the millions of dollars, that's not going to be audited. That's not going to be audited. And whereas we may not have been able to pick that up for the first time, because we would have all presumed when we speak about an audit, that we speak about an audit of everything. Not just some things, of everything. But history has taught us a cruel lesson, Mr. Speaker. History has shown to us that not everybody is that honest. And again, I find that the language in this piece of legislation that is attempting to meet the standard of the Santiago rules, it's not there. We're not seeing it. And then what do we turn around? An investment manager. Subject to section sub 2, the board shall, on advice of the minister, appoint one or more investment managers as may be necessary for the proper discharging of its functions. So again, Prime Minister, they're speaking about that we have a board, we have a corporate secretary, we have a custodian, and we have an investment manager who are supposed to be acting independently and are supposed to be the checks and balances. But when you put it all out, we realize that it's one person appointing all of these people. One person appointing all of these people. Now, the member from Castries East, the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, gave us a number, $110 million. So what's interesting is that in the revelation, finally, of contracts that were issued to Galaxy for the hotel project and contracts that were issued to Galaxy for the infrastructure program, we now no longer have to guess. We now know that the hotel contract that was originally done in 2018, and that was to build a $300 million hotel, Mr. Speaker, that they issued 210 million US dollars in applications, approval. And then now, the contract was amended to go to $1 billion US dollars. And in the case of the infrastructure program, a contract was issued where the minister, in essence, engaged, I'll use the language, Galaxy, to do $100 million US dollars of infrastructure work, and in turn was going to let them sell $600 million US dollars of CIP citizenship programs. Now, let's just take the number of 11,000. And even if we discarded for the moment the donation that on the infrastructure program, the 100,000 US that was supposed to come to the government of St. Lucia, of which the minister in the contract allowed Galaxy to collect themselves. Didn't have to come to the state. So just 11,000, and if you take on average $20,000 in administrative fees. Now, I wish I could take the 20,000 US from the hotel project, but in the hotel project, the minister, in his wisdom, chose to make Galaxy a promoter, and making them a promoter paid them a commission which was equivalent to the administrative fee. So we should have gotten, on average, 20,000 US dollars for 5,000 files. 100 million US. And then on the infrastructure program, we should be getting, on average, 20,000 for 6,000 files, 120 million US. 220 million US dollars is what should be in the economic fund. Should be. And as I said to you, that's not including the 600 million US dollars that we should have gotten that we didn't get because it wasn't required for them to give it to us. So even at 220 million US dollars, you heard it for yourself. The Prime Minister said that in the first instance, if we could have $110 million in a fund somewhere, that would make up what the IMF and the World Bank and all the economists around the world have been advising us. Where is it? Where's the money? Where are the funds? And if in fact the funds are there, and maybe they are, they've just not been reported, I don't know, because we've not seen the annual report. And the annual report that we're going to get is only the annual report from March of 2023 from April of 2023 to April of 2024. So what's happened between April 2024 and now, we don't know. And we don't even know what happened the year before because the Act required them to bring this to the House, and they have not. But mathematics and simple numbers tell us that there should be at least 220 million US dollars. So is the Prime Minister intending to take 110 million US dollars and putting it into the sovereign fund? And then to take that sovereign fund and to give it to this faceless, unknown custodian of which only the minister is going to make the decision? Because that's what the legislation says. Right? That's what it says. That's what it says. It says the board shall, on the advice of the minister and cabinet, if you want to stand on a point of hallucination, be happy to. No, you have to sit down at my leisure. No, if you want to write, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Castries South wants to stand on a point of hallucination, I'm happy for him to do so, and I will sit down and give him the time to explain. Okay, so then I will continue to read what is written, and I will allow anybody else to understand it. And it says, the board shall, on advice of the minister and cabinet, appoint by instrument in writing on terms and conditions. The board, on the advice of the minister and cabinet, determines a custodian of the fund. Where is the guardrails to say that this is going to go out to tender? Who is the best custodian? Who is this custodian? Who is this person that's so lucky? Because there's been a lot of lucky people in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. A lot of lucky people. When it comes to GPH and NLA, CIP, a lot of lucky people. So who is the next lucky person that is going to be this custodian? And how are you going to select this custodian? Well, hopefully it's not going to be a secret meeting that's going to allow the selection of the custodian.
Member from Mico South, you have 15 minutes left.
How many?
15.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Huh? No, I don't want any more time. So, Mr. Speaker, I remain...
Member for...
No, 15 minutes is fine. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to note that in the Labour Party's manifesto, last manifesto...
Member for Suzel Saltibus, my apologies because the lectern is blocking your microphone. I can't see it.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to invoke Section 3210 to provide a member an additional 15 minutes to complete his presentation.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be suspended in order to allow the member from Mico South an additional 15 minutes in which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no.
I think the ayes are there.
Members, when the question is put, members have to answer sufficiently loudly for the chair to hear. I now put the question again. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no.
Division.
Madam Deputy Clerk.
Honorable Virginia Albert Poyot, how do you vote? No, you have to say it in the mic, please. Mic.
Members, a wave of the hand is not enough. Please put on your microphone and state your position.
Honorable Virginia Albert Poyot, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Cancel is not there. Honorable Sean Edward, how do you vote? No. Mic, please.
No.
Honorable Bradley Felix, how do you vote?
Yes.
Honorable Richard Frederick, how do you vote?
The answer presupposes his first desire. He said it one more time. I vote no, in his interest.
Honorable Wayne Girard, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Joachim Henry, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Dr. Ernest Healed, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Emma Hippolyte, how do you vote?
No.
Honorable Moses Jabatis, how do you vote?
He said he did not want any more time, so I join him to say no.
Honorable Jeremiah Norbert, how do you vote?
No.
What?
No.
Honorable Philip Joseph Pierre, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Honorable members, the count is the noes 9 to the ayes 2, motion denied. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I say thank you to my colleagues. Mr. Speaker,
Remember, you will get the additional time that the division took.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to further enlighten everyone as to the problems that we have. Is my mic on? It's on? And that is, the member from Castries East again said, and we hear these terms, it's important for us to understand what these terms are, that this is a body corporate that's being established. Very, very clear words, which has their own meaning. And a body corporate is its own entity. It can be sued and it can sue. Very clearly, its own entity. Now, the economic fund, when it was set up, was deliberately set up to be outside of the government accounts. Why? Because the monies that went into it were not supposed to be used for recurrent expenditure. So we see St. Kitts, Dominica, Grenada, and to some extent Antigua, over the years were using a substantial amount of their money from their CIP earnings to pay for recurrent expenditure, to pay for salaries and to pay for utilities and to pay for those kinds of things. And now that the CIP program in St. Kitts has been hampered by the revelation that there has been discounting, illegal discounting. And in fact, that government now is attempting to go after persons who had their citizenship approved and requiring them to provide proof that they paid the right amount of money. And all of the scandal that has been associated with the program, the sales of CIP in Antigua have diminished, and as a result of it, there's been a substantial increase in debt in St. Kitts. And sadly, the money that they're incurring in debt is to pay for recurrent expenditures. And it's for that reason that the Economic Fund was established outside of the government fund, the consolidated account. But the persons that were on the board of directors, the director of finance was on the board of directors. The head of budget was on the board. The chief economist, a person from the Attorney General's office, a person from Invest St Lucia, all these government officials were there with very strict rules on what the money could be used for. And the minister's role and cabinet role at the time was solely to give them the guidelines, but not to tell them what to do. in this instance with this sovereign wealth fund, the board, every decision they're going to make is subject to the minister and the advice of the minister. Everywhere you turn,
Mr. Speaker, can I just,
Member Castries.
on a point of order,
South?
Mr.
Yes.
Speaker. I mean, Mr. Speaker, we've decided that we're going to allow the honourable member to speak freely. Let St Lucians hear him on an important bill as this. But he has been persistently misleading and spreading untruths. So can I just read, Mr. Speaker, to show how he's misleading the House? But he's saying how under the National Economic Fund there were specific guidelines as to how money should be given and that the ministers are not involved. Let me just read it from the National Economic Fund, Section 12. The board may, after consultation with Cabinet, grant or refuse an application made for a loan. Now, it says the board may, after consultation with Cabinet, grant or refuse. How is it that ministers and government, and I mean he's been doing that throughout, which is why he did not get more time. Because we want you to take it on script, speak about the welfare, the fund, and let St. Lucians hear what you have to say. We will answer you. But you do not have to persistently, and I will stand up and systematically point out all the misinformation that you've provided. But this one, you're getting a little too far. Your time is running out. I would really appreciate if you just at least stop misleading the House on this one.
Proceed, Member.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so happy for that intervention because that would save us all a lot of time. You know, legal language is very, very important. There's a big difference between advice and consultation. Big difference. It says the board, after consultation, may, not shall. So it means the discretion is left to the board. To the board. Not the minister. But he's talking about the economic fund. Exactly the point. Why is it not the same way? In all of the other ones, okay, is on the advice of the minister. Not about we get to consult his advice. No. The advice is you hire this person, and that's the person you're supposed to hire. That's what it says.
Member from Mico South, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's why when you read this, it's thwart with problems. It has all kinds of language to take away any accountability. And remember, the purpose of bringing up the Santiago rules is to say that this is going to be and stand the litmus test of standing up to that, of transparency and accountability. But the language in here is not protecting the interest of the people of St. Lucia. It's not ensuring that the monies that are being generated through the CIP funds, and you know, I'm happy that the minister brought up Section 52 of the current act. And it says the assets of the fund shall not be used. So is the assets only money? Is there something else that they're suggesting that's being put in here that we don't know about? So it's not just money. I don't know. It says the assets of the fund shall not be used. I'm asking you a question. Is the assets including money? So, and again, I asked the question because when you go to the manifesto, it says on page 9, section 7, in collaboration with the private sector, transfer some government fixed asset.
Member, may I just point you out to section 2 of the Act at page 8?
Of the manifesto?
No, of the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act.
You're raising a point of hallucination, Mr. Speaker?
No, I'm pointing you to where it describes what an asset is.
Okay, sorry, thank you. It's where? On page what?
Page 2, the interpretation section.
Page 2, interpretation. Asset means a real personal property, a part of a share of an asset of interest and asset. So I'm 100% right. So it is not just money. How are the assets getting in here? Where does this speak to how the decisions? The Minister of Finance is going to make the decision by themselves as to which assets you're going to take and put into the fund? So it's very clear that the monies are coming from the economic fund. Where are the assets coming from, and what's the process that the government is going to use to declare that they're going to transfer, as an example, HIA Airport? I don't know what assets. Are they going to take school buildings? Are they going to take our hospitals? Are they going to take Wasco? Although I hear people using a different name to describe Wasco these days. Where are these assets coming from? And then it goes on to say, and very interestingly, the fund shall not be used to provide credit to the government. So it means whatever assets we've put in, or whatever money is in, it cannot be used, I assume, as a loan to government, or any public enterprise, the statutory bodies, or to any private sector entities, or any other person and entity. B, as collateral for debts, guarantees, commitments, or other liabilities of any other person or entity, whether public or private. But it speaks to what it cannot do with government entities, but it has no restrictions on what those assets could be used for the fund. So can the fund turn around now and leverage those assets for the fund? And the justification for that is the money that you ever going to leverage it for is now going to be put in? That's very unclear. I get it that it says you can't use it to help any government entity, but it in no way restricts the fund from using those assets to benefit the fund. And I say that because in a previous cabinet, which the member from Castries Central was in as well, there was a proposal to establish a sovereign fund.
Member for Mico South, you have 1 minute left, so you may begin wrapping up.
That a sovereign fund was going to be established by another Robert. We have had 3 Roberts in our lives: Robert Lindquist, Robert Ainsworth, and Robert Wentworth. And one of those Roberts was going to establish this fund in which we were going to put all the assets in, and then they were going to leverage the assets out. And the member from Castries Ancillary was actually working for one of those, Ancillary and Canaries, was actually working at the time with one of those entities. And I heard from the Prime Minister glowing reports as to how much time the member has been spending in England, where this one Robert also lives, in putting together this fund. So has the government already predetermined who is going to be the custodian of this fund? How can it be that we're coming to the House today and there's no processes being put in place, no guardrails being put in place? So, Mr. Speaker, in wrapping up, I have to say that we already have an entity called the Economic Fund. I wish there was greater clarity, Mr. Speaker, on how much money is in it. We certainly can calculate, based on the contracts that we've received, that over 11,000 files were issued, and therefore 800 million US dollars ought to be in the fund, right? I'm glad the Prime Minister can laugh about it. I certainly don't find myself laughing about it at all. 800 million US dollars. I can't even begin to think of the number of houses, the number of roads, the improvement in our healthcare services, improvement in our sports, and being able to have more than the amount of money that the World Bank and the IMF would have designated to be put in a fund to deal with exogenous shocks, particularly with what's going on geopolitically in today's market. There's another storm brewing, and there's going to be need, I'm sure, for us to have to draw down on that fund. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry that I'm not able to acquiesce to the Prime Minister's request in that I support this, but I'm certainly available always to sit down with them and to see how we can make sure that we tighten up on the legislation here and to bring the necessary resources to the table so we can make sure that we do something that does work in the best interest of people. But I dare to say, Mr. Prime Minister, and to my other colleagues, as this document is written, I think it fails that test. And I'm clearly not understanding what added value that this fund brings that we cannot obtain already from the Economic Fund. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
We had the National Economic Fund.